Hi, I am Verdaillia Turner, and this is Let's Talk. We're here today with the notable, honorable State Representative Billy Mitchell. He is my state representative, and Representative Mitchell was just commissioned by President Biden to serve in a particular capacity. We're so honored. We're going to let you tell us about it. And just to let you know a little bit about this state representative, he is now serving in, I think, his 21st year at the State House. He constantly is re-elected in DeKalb County, and rightfully so. He is also the national president of AfricanAmerican or Black legislators, and there are about 800 across the country. So we are so delighted to have my own state representative, Billy Mitchell.
Good to be with you, Verdaillia. Certainly, I consider this an honor.
All right, let's talk about Billy Mitchell, the man. I understand that you are a man of faith and that you're very active in your church. You want to tell us a little bit about what you do in your church and the name of that church?
Well, the church's name is St. Philip African Methodist Episcopal Church. It is the second largest AME church on the East Coast. I happen to serve as a trustee for the church, longtime member there as well.
And did you dye your hair gray because you look too young to be a trustee?
That is funny. It's just the matter of involvement. On the side, I've had gray hair since high school.
Okay. You're also a family man, and you have two beautiful young adults and a wife that is remarkably attractive.
Well,
she was a queen, I understand, at her college. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, yeah, certainly starting with my wife, is that I always say she's better than I deserve, for sure. And she is in the education profession as well. She's a professor at the Clark Atlanta University, occasionally teaches some classes at Spelman. My daughter, like yourself, is a Spelman graduate, and she now works for this high-end fashion company, Tom Ford, in New York, living her best life. And my son is a sophomore now at the Howard University in Washington, D.C., where he plays football. As a matter of fact, he's one of the quarterbacks of the team. So he's also living his best life. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel where I can stop writing checks, but they're all doing very well.
Are you and your children products of public schools?
Actually, we are. I am a product of public school. You know, Verdaillia, I don't know if I ever told you this, but my first job out of college was a teacher, public school teacher in New Jersey, as it was. I went to Rutgers University and then taught in the school system there. And there were two competing unions at the time. I mean, it was fierce because the membership was half and half. The AFT and the NEA at the time, because AFT was considered to be the more rebellious, and I joined the AFT as well.
I didn't know you were an AFT member.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to vote for you again because of that now. All right, all of my NEA friends, I love you. So your mother, I understand, was very active in the community, and tell us a little bit about that and what you learned from your mom.
Well, I can tell you that's probably how I got my introduction into politics. My mother was in law enforcement, worked for an elected sheriff, and eventually was appointed chief in the sheriff's department. She was the first woman, black or white, chief in the law enforcement department in the entire state of New Jersey. It was certainly an eye-opening experience. My mother used to carry a gun, and there were many days that I thought that she would use it on me if I didn't, if I didn't do right.
But she was responsible gun carrier. I understand there's a story behind your mom, the first time she had to use that gun. Tell us about that.
Well, I will tell you, the first time I ever saw my mother cry was she came home one day and she said, I had to use my gun. And my mother was a very mild-mannered. She had a personality. I guess I get my personality from her. They were serving a warrant to a woman, My mother was being very nice, trying to reason with the woman. Most of the time they train these officers to make sure that they understand they mean business when they come there, so that they don't have to escalate it. But my mother, was the kind that was tried to be very, very nice. And the woman took out a machete and was going to hit her partner. And she had no choice but to shoot the woman. She shot the woman in her arm. And the woman, all she could say as they carried her out on the stretcher to the hospital was, "I didn't think you would shoot me. I just didn't think you would shoot me." And so that taught her a lesson, but she cried. In an addendum to that story, my mother visited that woman in the hospital when she was there to see how she was doing. And believe it or not, that was the one and only time she had to use her weapon.
Would you say that most of our law enforcement officers are caring and responsible people, because now they are being depicted as, I guess, just gunslingers? And I would like for you to comment on responsible gun legislation.
Well, I would say most, just like perhaps in most professions, you're going to have some folks that perhaps don't need to be in that profession. We're in now a culture where it's shoot first and ask questions later. We have some that when you look at their personality, I could tell you that I could not be a police officer. I'd probably be in jail myself, because, the way some of the interactions that police officers have with folks, I'll never forget, and this is probably off subject. I saw this guy who clearly was on some kind of drugs. He literally, and this was during the height of COVID, he literally spit in a police officer's face. And this police officer just wiped his face and wrestled him to the ground, handcuffed him, took him away. Now, had that been me, he might have had to been shot, but and I'd be in jail and, asking people like yourself to bail me out. But the reality is, most folks in the professions that they serve are doing the best that they can and doing a real good job. But, we in this country has a love affair with guns, and I'm no prude on guns. I do believe that responsible ownership is acceptable. But if you have the statistics suggest, and these statistics come from the FBI when Trump was in office, so they're legitimate. But the statistics say if you have a gun in your home, you are more likely to injure yourself or a loved one, or worse, than you are an intruder. And simply being someone intruding into your home while you are there is a relatively rare occurrence. And more importantly, most consumers who purchase guns have no clue how to properly maintain it, how to properly store it, or to shoot it under stressful situations. I used to go to the gun range with our sheriff at the time, Tom Brown, and I got pretty proficient of just shooting at a target there, and actually it was rather fun. And then the police officers came and said, "Let me put you through a stress test that we had to go through." And I will tell you, it is a whole different procedure, whole different experience when they place you under stress, when you got to make split decisions. Most people in the average home, if I shoot you and miss and it goes through your wall, it can hit someone on the other side of the wall. So I believe as a result that if you're going to purchase a gun, there should be background checks to make sure that you are mentally competent, that you have nothing in your background that would suggest that you would use a gun illegally or improperly. There should be waiting periods. Most people, I get upset with my spouse, I'm going to get a gun. And there should be a waiting period for that. There should be some training required before you get a gun, and that training should include how you should shoot it under stressful situations, how to maintain it, and how to properly store it.
Thank you so much. So now you've been at the Georgia General Assembly now for about 21 years?
21 years.
In other words, 11 terms?
11 terms.
Okay. Now, this year there was some anti-Semitic legislation that failed. Could you tell us why it failed and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've had anti-Semitic legislation previously, and admittedly, it did not go as far as some people would have liked. Then we had Georgia was one of the few states that did not have an anti-hate crime legislation, and a couple of years ago we put that in place. And there were those who are very sympathetic to the Jewish community, but felt that this anti-Semitic legislation gave them additional and special rights that were not enjoyed by others. I supported the legislation. I thought it was a good legislation, but obviously the majority of the legislators did not, and as a result, it did not pass. But fortunately, it comes back next year. We just had another, at the beginning of the legislative session, we had a terrible anti-Semitic incidents in the communities where those who dislike Jews were passing out anti-Semitic flyers, and we just had another one a week or so ago. So I think we're going to have to deal with that. Someone once asked me, can we make people love you and the like? And of course, I may not can make you like me, but I certainly can regulate your behavior with the consequences of you doing such illegal things.
Mm-hmm. And former State Representative Tyrone Brooks,
good man he is,
who's dubbed as the son of the late Dr. Reverend Hosea Williams. And Dr. Williams, we know, is one of the men, the civil rights, civil rights movement that walked right there with Dr. King, and both of them are to be honored, of course, in their own right, informed us that when he was there, that the Georgia General Assembly already passed some type of anti-Semitic legislation.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad that you lifted up Tyrone Brooks, extraordinary legislator. When I first came on board, he saw something in me, and he became a mentor and is a very, very good friend. I would tell you, we have a different flag. We no longer have the Confederate symbols on our flag because of Tyrone Brooks. In addition to the anti-Semitic bill, we also have the Martin Luther King Jr. statue on the campus of the Georgia Capitol because of Tyrone Brooks. And he's done some great work, and I'm glad to be able to lift him up, and we need to honor him. You're right. Give him his flowers when he can certainly appreciate them.
And he's still doing work there in East Georgia, right outside of Athens, trying to bring justice to the area where there were lynchings.
Absolutely.
And that was Dr. King's concentration when he went and was called by his friend to go to see about the strikers there. Right. A lot of folks don't know that backstory. And Tyrone and one other, they were supposed to stay right there in Monroe until Dr. King got there. And Dr. King was assassinated before that could happen. And so we worked with, and others worked with, State Representative Tyrone Brooks to make sure that justice is done there in Monroe. Every year there's a reenactment, and so we just wanted to just put that, to shout out for him.
You know, Georgia being the movie capital that it is, that is a great movie, waiting for someone to write and develop that script, because it's reminiscent of the Emmett Till story.
Yes, it is. And also, you know, there's so many other stories, sideline stories with that. As I talked with Dr. Emerson, which is Dr. Hosea Williams' oldest daughter. Many people don't know her, and she is one of our neighbors. Of course, you know her, one of your constituents. They're working, we are all working right now to try to make sure that Dr. Hosea Williams is properly recognized, especially in DeKalb County.
Absolutely.
Of course, we want a statue. Y'all, I'm just doing that,
Absolutely.
And so more of that will be coming along.
Absolutely.
I want to ask you about some other legislation. This legislation deals with just a resolution, and it's called the Elimination of the Windfall Elimination Provision.
Right.
And that's a little background for everybody. In 1983, right at 1983, Congress enacted the Windfall Elimination Provision. I said, Verdaillia, what's that big terminology? Well, it was designed to give states a break from paying into Social Security. And about 15 states elected to not pay for state workers and or teachers or require school districts to pay into Social Security. So therefore, if you are in a state like California or Rhode Island or Georgia, and you are a teacher, then you don't pay any Social Security because the school district does not what? Take it out of your check. However, there are people who have worked side jobs, because you know teachers have to moonlight, right? And so when people do make side jobs or they're coming in from other states, et cetera, they're entitled to Social Security. I just happen to be one of them now. This is going to seem self-serving, but we started on this many years ago. The retirees will not get their full Social Security, even though they paid into it. People are saying it's double dipping. I beg your pardon? Let's not talk about all the professions where people have paid into retirement systems and or paid these high salaries. Yeah. And they don't retire in poverty like many of our teachers do, and our policemen or whoever is entitled to their Social Security benefits. So we're simply asking Georgia to urge Congress to eliminate the windfall elimination provision. And Congressman Sanford Bishop has been very diligent in trying to get that windfall elimination provision eliminated. I want to take my hat off to you, Representative, because you took legislation this year, you took the lead on it, and tried to get the attention of the State House and the senators and the governor, hello, governor, we're going to send the state to you, so that Georgia would do what? Tell us.
Well, certainly, and you mentioned the key provision in this law, and that is it would benefit those who've contributed into Social Security. These are people who have paid into Social Security, and I believe it's just only fair that if they've paid into the system, they should receive the benefits much like anyone else who has paid into the system. So this urging resolution would simply urge Congress to make sure that they eliminate that windfall provision so that those who have paid into the system can enjoy it. It is a nonpartisan issue that we can emphasize, that we have emphasized to the governor. This would benefit Democrats and Republicans alike. And I think it's just only fair to do. You know, Verdaillia, why I'm thinking about it, and something I hadn't remembered before, you came to me, as one of my constituents that certainly keeps me on my toes, and you said that what we should do, we should add a provision on licenses to let people know their blood type, so that if they could get into, that was another bill I submitted at your urging, and the governor has signed that bill to indicate to you, and starting July 1st, that will be on a notation on driver's licenses that your blood type, you can elect to have your blood type listed on your license, so that if you should get an emergency, they do not have to waste any time trying to decide your blood type. And this just goes to show what good engagement and informed and citizens who advocate for their best interests, they get a better government than those who don't. And you mentioned that to me, and I promised I would do it, and I just was informed yesterday, as a matter of fact, that the governor did in fact sign that.
I want to be there. Right. Thank you so much.
Right.
And thank you for carrying that legislation.
Right.
And hello, Governor. Thank you for signing it ahead of time.
Absolutely.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
And that came about actually because I have a friend girl who, when I was at one of the hospitals, and she got sick suddenly and she died, and in listening to the nurses, they were saying people would come in under trauma, and they didn't know the blood types, and by the time they found out and got the blood in, the people would have expired. And if you have your identification on you and you're in a car wreck or any kind of accident, what have you, then that would be, the nurses actually thought that would be life-saving. So I want to say thank you to all of the nurses at Hillendale in DeKalb County. That's actually the people that were talking to us over her deathbed, Billy.
Wow.
For that.
Wow.
And thank you. and
Wow.
thank the House Representatives and the Senators for passing that.
Right.
Thank you. I had no idea.
Well, yeah,
But
I submitted it, and it was one of those issues that everyone felt that was a reasonable thing to do. And I can't wait to show you the mock-up of the first license that has that on there. We'll get with you. Maybe we'll do a press conference with the nurses at Hillendale.
I was Nurse Doris Johnson,
Mm-hmm.
my friend girl. She's the deceased, and one of your constituents.
Oh, wow.
And because of her illness, that's how the idea came about. Just listening to the nurses. But thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, I'm going to go to my next question. Okay. We want to talk about the voucher bill.
Mm-hmm.
As educators, we know that vouchers, we know what vouchers do and don't do. So I'm going to let the state representative talk about that voucher bill, where it is right now. And I know we've had vouchers to come up for many years. They just keep chipping and chipping away until they try to knock that door in for vouchers. What would you comment on?
Well, the proposal in Georgia, and as a matter of fact, it's sweeping the nation. I have, just as a backstory, I have found that we have certain segments of our community that they don't want their children to go to school with us. They would rather their kids go to private school, but now they want to take public dollars to pay for their children to go to private school. I call this latest proposal, HB 233, is really a scam because they want to take $6,500 per pupil for public school dollars so that it could go towards tuition at a private school. Now, during this debate, we asked the study be done. The average private school tuition in Georgia is like $22,000, and that takes in the entire state. If you were just to take in the private school tuition of Metro Atlanta, the average tuition is $28,000. $6,500 is not going to do much for the average parent trying to get their kids into private school and pay for that. This is just to give the well-to-do, those who wish to send their kids a break, if you will. I will tell you, one of the things that I'm amazed by is that all the private schools, these independent schools, in the part of their application process, not only do they do interviews, but ask you to submit a picture with your application. And
that's a form of discrimination.
Yeah, I always ask the proponents of this, if this is truly about merit, if this is all about how well the child does in class, why is it necessary that you get to see what they look like? And no one could satisfactorily answer that question. It should not matter what race, ethnicity you are if you're considering my credentials.
Or who the parents are.
Or who the parents are. And so I would just hope, I don't begrudge anyone who wishes to send their kids to private school. Have at it. But you should not do that with public school dollars. I believe we need more resources in public schools. I believe the more challenging the school system situation is, the more resources they need. The better we need to pay our teachers. In fact, our system the way it is now, the further you are away from the student, the more money that you make. I believe we need to change that around. We need to give those who do a great job of improving the performance of our students much more money. And those are the kinds of things we ought to do with the resources that we have.
And perhaps we need some ex officio people who are appointed to the State Board of Education. And I'm loaded, you're loaded, but I'm going to volunteer just in case the governor has any ideas about that.
Good for you.
Because so often the policies get buried, other priorities and et cetera. But with vouchers, if I send my child to a private school, I get a tax write-off anyway, do I not?
That is true.
All right.
That is true.
So if I send my child to, let's say, Atlanta public schools or to the CAB, it is costing that district anywhere from $9,000 to $11,000, $12,000 to educate that child. And that's children who are in mainstream education. When we're talking about special education, we're looking at special apparatus, special chairs, lifting kids up where adults can't lift them up, just to put them on the bus, to take them down, to wheel them into classrooms, kids who are on oxygen tanks, kids who have to have special personnel to feed them, to dry them. And children can stay into our public schools, which they do, until age 22. Many people don't know that. Then we're talking about the other end of the spectrum, where we have children who are extremely gifted in some particular area that requires firsthand one-on-one manipulation and attention, because they are challenging even to the system to keep them involved. Our districts are doing a darn good job. And what is happening is that, what is really happening, this is just not my opinion, y'all, folk they have their mind on the Benjamins, on the George Washingtons, on the Lincolns. And education systems have become havens for entrepreneurs to make money off the back of taxpayers. Now, let's say vouchers pass, and I have my $6,500, and I don't want to go to Redan High School. I want my child to go to Lakeside. Chances are they're not going to go to Lakeside because there are only so many seats over there. Or vice versa. There are only seats at Redan High School. So the best thing, and we talked to the state PTA president yesterday about this, Ms. Ross, she's the upcoming state PTA president, is for parents to be actively engaged, and for us as the community and school districts to do a better job at helping parents not to be intimidated, what they can do, and then that's part of my job also. So when parents are actively engaged, it's like citizens being engaged in government. Children get the best education.
And you know, Verdaillia, you hit the nail on the proverbial head. The reality is, as a taxpayer, most of the taxes you pay go to your school system. It's just an extraordinary amount of money that we pay to our school system, whether you have kids in the school system or not. So you would think that parents would really want to be engaged within the process. And I always say, you know, those who are engaged, they get a better government. And we need to make sure that the parents truly get involved, truly try to understand what they're doing with the resources that they have, and make sure that they get what they're being charged for.
And I know 2/3 of my taxes go toward my property taxes going in East Blossom, that kind of thing. And school districts affect the price of real estate, business, etc. Look, what I have to really say about that is so many parents who are not engaged. Of course, some parents don't know to be engaged. Many of our parents are immigrants, and they love this country, and I'm so glad that they do, because of what we can offer. But if we're talking about equity, I think we're changing that term also. We are going to have to make sure that all citizens are served, and those public institutions are continuously not only held to high standards, but they're funded properly. We're also going to ask school districts to look at their budgets, to tighten their belts. I take my hat off to the CEO of DeKalb County, Michael Thurman, when he was the superintendent for a while, helping us out there. DeKalb County found millions of dollars. And you know, DeKalb alone has a $2.9 billion budget, plus all the money it's getting from the federal government. And other districts do too. And in some parts of Georgia, the districts are just trying to hold on. 180 school districts. So all of our districts need help, because our population has increased, the diversity has increased, the needs have increased. So you keep saying money, money, money. So we can do like Jimmy Carter was saying, you know, we want a chicken in every pot. That wasn't Jimmy, that was Roosevelt. But Jimmy Carter was talking about the same thing. So we can tighten our belts, but at the same time be responsible and help the school system be responsible for our dollars. And that's why those school board elections are so important also.
So very important.
But the bottom line is, y'all, we don't need vouchers. That's special legislation for special interest. And what will happen is that you'll have people to convince folk who are disengaged or who think that they are entitled to something, I don't know. They will say, okay, give us vouchers, give us vouchers. And when you crack that door with $6,500, you better believe it, 4 years from now, it's going to be 12,000 or more. And that's what's happening with an amendment that needs to be appealed. Let me be the first to say it. Sometimes we're busy passing laws. We need to repeal some of these laws. Those doors that open the door to cancer, we need to stop it. We need to stop all of that erosion. Okay? And I'm going to talk about that a little later on. But thank you so much for fighting that. And we want to thank the Republicans and the Democrats, who said H no to vouchers, and that means heavens no. and this time they're still alive because the bills are there for what? 2-year period.
Right.
And with
right.
that said, tell us a little bit about the business of the state capitol. You were in session for 40 days and
Right.
nights.
Right.
And you do nights too.
Right.
And you work full-time jobs too.
Right.
And most of you do.
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, it's a misnomer. The Georgia legislature was created under the guise that it was supposed to be a part-time legislature, and that is certainly no longer the case. We're actually in session 40 days, which means those are the days we can vote and do committee work. But the reality is those days are spread over about 3, maybe 4 months because they're not consecutive days. And then once the session is over, you know, our responsibilities don't end. There are other meetings, and there are certainly meetings in the community. I always say if I walk out of my door and a constituent has a problem with state government, I cannot say, sorry, I can't help you. We're only in session 40 days.
Even if you're going to get your oil changed in the car.
That's
okay.
exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. So that's a misnomer, and you know, it gives me an opportunity to say that I think that the salaries for legislators are artificially low, intentionally so. Because right now the only people who can serve are those who are either retired, well-to-do, or have jobs who like their members to be a part of the legislature because of some interest that they may have.
I hope everybody heard that.
And that's the only people who can serve.
Mm-hmm.
And that's intentionally so. That's why you see down at the Capitol, every corporate interest is represented. Every interest of those who have big businesses are represented. Mm-hmm. It's easy to, as you walk around the Capitol, as you know, there's some days you can't walk a straight line without walking into a lobbyist. It's easy to say, who's representing
So do you see a lot of representatives from the big, rich teacher unions? You know, we were big and rich and powerful. Do you see a lot of lobbyists?
You know, we have some lobbyists there, but we don't see a lot. And I will tell you.
Because we don't have the money.
Right. And but you'll see, you name the corporation, mm-hmm. and they will say. I'll tell you a quick little story about my second term. There was a big corporation. Not going to mention the corporation's name, but they were going through transition and did not have any lobbyists there. And we passed a bill that cost this corporation about $10 million a year. The next session, they hired so many lobbyists that there was a lobbyist for every single legislator there. And obviously, we changed that policy. So no question about it. It makes you say, who is representing the mm-hmm. interest of the average, everyday person? And that's why it's so very important for people to be engaged, be informed, and advocate for their best interest. You know, I always say if, you know, occasionally we hear from communities, how come that community over there seems to get everything that they want, and this community over here seems to be underserved? Mm-hmm. Now, I can give you all kinds of sociological theories and excuses, as some may do, but the real reason that is because the community that is well served is informed, engaged, and advocate for their best interests. And the communities that are underserved, they're uninformed, unengaged, and don't advocate for their best interests.
And so the real education in terms of the political process happens outside of the classroom.
No question about that.
Mm-hmm. That's what we're talking about, equity, y'all. We're talking about equity.
There's no question about it. You know, there's certain things that will happen that I know I will hear from you mm-hmm. if it goes on. There's certain communities in our communities where we have gun shootings and things that go on, and that if that were to happen in other communities, those communities will stand up and say, we will no longer elect you to office if you don't do something about this. Whereas our community, people say, well, it is what it is, and mm-hmm. you know, their school system, you take the school system, there are schools that if they were underperforming, there'd be such an uprising of parents at that school.
That's right.
Until something would be done. Whereas when things don't go as they should in schools and other communities, people say, well, it is what it is.
Well, let me say this. In the 70s, now, mm-hmm. you know, that's quite some while, I'm telling my age, mm-hmm. Sarah Smith School on the north side here in Atlanta, elementary school, mm-hmm. PTA made sure that in the windows of every classroom there was an air conditioning.
Hmm.
And at the end of that year, they had over 30,000 still in the PTA fund. You say, oh, Turner, why you saying that everybody got air conditioning now? No, we were in hot boxes, sweat boxes,
Mm-hmm.
and water going down our legs and arms through the day,
Mm-hmm.
crowded classrooms over at East Atlanta High School,
Wow.
over at Thero High School, that kind of thing. And
the north side had air conditions.
oh, and the parents understood that. And although some of their dads were in corporations or businessmen and the moms were stay-at-home moms or had businesses, et cetera, many of them were not. Some were just regular, I would say, middle-class people and working folk, but understood that the community was protected and built better if you have those community schools. And so that's what's around community schools, actually. However, when we look at the way communities are formed, and we look at the evolution of how communities are formed, people become more disengaged, and they think that schools, just like governmental agencies, are supposed to do particular things, and they're supposed to be the great outcome. No, that is not what happens. So we do need more education for the public. It needs to be a department in government, and hey, I'll do it free. Just
Wow.
to talk to the people on the air. I'm challenging all of our networks right now so that we can talk about community engagement and what that means on the cellular level and how we can get our citizens engaged in a responsible way.
Good for you.
If not, people would be led by whatever they're hearing on social media, whatever they're hearing in the street, whatever they're led to believe. And we have so many people now, so many of us, and sometimes I'm guilty too, of expecting and suspecting the worst as it relates to all of our institutions.
Right.
We need not be that divided.
Wow.
All right. So now, I want you to tell us when you were at the State House, and there are so many bills in a session. How is it that all of these bills die, and some bills are passed? Tell us about that process.
Well, you have to get, good legislation, is just one factor in it. You definitely need the majority of your colleagues to support the legislation. I always say that legislation is good policy and or good politics. If legislation is good policy and good politics, that legislation passes quickly. That's what you get the majority of us and almost all of us support it. If it is bad policy but good politics, unfortunately, that kind of legislation passes all the time. Bad policy, good politics. Good politics trumps good policy, and that's what the category this voucher bill is. Bad policy, bad politics never see the light of day. But unfortunately, bad policy, good politics passes far too often. But we have to get the majority of our colleagues to support a piece of legislation, and in both houses. It's an arduous process of getting legislation passed. You propose it, it gets assigned to a committee, it gets studied by a subcommittee. If it passes the subcommittee, goes to the full committee. If it passes the full committee, then it goes to another committee that will decide if and when we can vote on the floor on this particular piece of legislation. Once it passes the House, goes over to the Senate, and the whole process starts all over again. If one word is changed in the Senate, has to come back to the process in the House for us to agree or amend it and the like, and then it goes back to the Senate for them to agree. Then it gets to the governor's office, who has the ability to sign it into law or veto it or not allow it to go into law.
And so fiscal bills originate in the House?
All fiscal bills have to start in the House of Representatives. Therefore, it makes the Speaker of the House and the House of Representatives so very important. If we don't start the process, if we don't agree when it comes to fiscal matters, it will not happen.
And how many men and women are in the House?
180 need 91 votes in the House to pass a bill.
91.
91.
All I have to do is get 91 votes.
91. And I tell you, we're very close in votes nowadays. The average bill passes in the House 95, 96, sometimes 98, which means we're very close. When I say we're
more of a one Georgia than the world thinks.
That's it. Absolutely right.
That's a good thing.
I think that is a good thing. I think that everyone's voice should be considered. And when you have one party that is overwhelmingly controlling the process, then sometimes some voices are not heard.
And that's not to say that different ideas can't come about, and we want everybody to be homogenous. But you all go through a process of hashing out the pros and cons of a bill. Now, committees. How are people assigned to committees?
Well, that is done by the Speaker. I train the new legislators when they come on board in our caucus in the House of Representatives, and I tell them first off that the Speaker of the House is the most important person in their legislative experience. The Speaker of the House decides where your offices are. The Speaker of the House decides which committees you're on, and he ultimately decides the legislation. So he's a very, very important and powerful person. And that is solely his discretion. He can remove you from committees, which I've seen that done as well.
So I'm not going to question the Speaker, of course. Certainly won't. That is a powerful position. If I was there, I probably would vicariously say kiss the ring, right? But I have noticed in my experience at the State House, there are people that might sit on energy, transportation, education that's not adept in that particular field. And I noticed for one of our governors, I think it was our first Republican governor, a committee could decide something or about to vote on something, and there would be these people who would come in, I forgot the names, there were about 3 of them, and they could report back to the governor and change a vote.
Right. Yeah. When they first came in,
does that still exist?
No, we changed. There was such an uproar about them. They called them hawks at that time.
Yeah.
Yes, and where they could come in any committee if they needed some votes, so that at that time the Democrats could not prevail on a particular policy. There was such an uproar about that they did remove that, but. Very fortunately, at least since I've been there, and as a matter of fact, even before I was there, because the previous Speaker before I was there was the Speaker Murphy, and he was the Speaker of the House for 40-some-odd years. Not just the representative, but the Speaker. I mean, that's the ultimate power to be in that position for that long. But we've had some great speakers who you could talk to, you can reason with, you can discuss issues with. Certainly we disagreed on many a policy, but I felt as though I could be heard.
And now, the Speaker is over the House of Representatives, and the Lieutenant Governor is?
Over the State Senate.
Over the State Senate. Okay. So would you tell us, oh, Jesus, that's a real important election then, Lieutenant Governor.
Absolutely. Now, the Lieutenant Governor is elected statewide, unlike the Speaker of the House.
Right.
The members of the House of Representatives elect the Speaker of the House, but the Lieutenant Governor in the Senate, he or she has to run statewide. It's a he in this particular case.
And then you have caucuses inside of the House, minority, majority, and same thing with the Senate.
Same
okay,
thing.
So tell us, it is particular and special roles that you may have with your caucus and constituents.
Well, I chair the House, in the House of Representatives, the Democratic Caucus. That means whatever we do in the House of Representatives, I help lead that effort, myself and the leader of the House of Representatives. I tell my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that we have a much tougher job because, when you are in charge of Democrats, it is a whole different experience than Republicans. I always say Republicans fall in line. Democrats have to fall in love. We just don't automatically follow a particular position.
Because it's so homogenous, you think, and we have cultural differences, background differences, and I mean that are more diverse and more richly diverse.
But I would say that, with Republicans, it's been my experience that whatever politically serves them the best is the way they coalesce. Whereas, for instance, they had a candidate for U.S. Senate that was, in my view, very flawed, but they still supported him because it met their political aim. Whereas if we had a candidate that flawed,
which they had a longer vision in terms of what
exactly
their target was.
That's exactly. They knew where they wanted to go, and that was more important to who was driving them there. And that serves a very important goals for them. And you know, we have to make sure that we really love our candidates before we really support them.
So we as Democrats have to fall in love, and we as Republicans have to fall in line.
There you go.
Oh, Ward, I can say something for that. But anyway, okay. Now, so you also have a role as the president,
Right.
chairperson or president of the National AfricanAmerican Legislators, and there are 800 across the country. Tell us about your role.
Well, yes, it's actually called the National Black Caucus of State Legislators and a foundation. I will say to you, Verdaillia, that the NBCSL represents the interests of black legislators across this nation in U.S. possessions. 40% of the current black members in Congress, U.S. Congress, are former members of our organization, including the 44th president was a very active member of our organization. And I tell people this all the time. If I knew then that he was going to go on to be the Barack Obama, I'd have built a better relationship with him. But he was a very active member of our organization, and it is as a result of that organization that we're able to do some great things nationally. We're able to find what others are doing in other states that work really well, and then bring it to our communities. And even in Tennessee, they expelled 3 members. 2 of those members were of our organization simply because they were protesting gun rights in Tennessee. And we coalesced as an organization to support those members. And I think if the Tennessee leadership had to do that over again, they would not have done it, at least not in the way that they did it there, because it made those legislators stronger, and it certainly brought attention to a chamber. That's what happens when it's overwhelmingly one party.
So we have the president right here in Georgia, you, right here in DeKalb County, at the county I live in, and right here next to me.
Yes.
Ooh-wee.
And it's a rewarding position, and it has enabled me to do some great things nationally as well as serve our community, and that's so very important.
So y'all, now I know why Representative Billy Mitchell is twisting my arms, I'm not going to say, on some things. I have to just take my hat off to him. We love, we call him fondly Billy Mitchell, because he gets along with a lot of folk, and sometimes if you say something, and guess what? And I can know that he doesn't like it, and I'll throw it out there, and he just smiles. He doesn't say a word. So it keeps him alive to do greater things. Now, let's talk about this great appointment by President Biden. And you are on a committee. Tell us all about that commission.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's the President's Commission on Providing Excellence in Education, Excellence and Advocacy in Education, particularly in the black community. And I'm very grateful for that, because I always say that education is the escalator to greater upward mobility. You show me a community that is well-to-do, I'll show you a community that has great educational opportunities. You show me a safe community, it's a community that has great educational opportunities. And that's some of the things that we need to make certain that are available, particularly for our community. You know, I was just asked the other day, how did I get so engaged with the Biden administration? You know, like to tell the story. I'm watching, I believe it was CNN, and I'm watching Joe Biden give his announcement that he is running for president. I was the incoming president of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators at the time, and there was a congressman who at that time was president of the Congressional Black Caucus. His name was Cedric Richmond from New Orleans. And maybe 5 minutes after Biden got off that stage, Congressman Richmond called me and says, hey, you are the incoming president, NBCSL. Biden's path to the White House is through the black community. We need you to endorse him. Cedric is a good friend of mine, and we joke a lot. So I said, all right, I'll consider endorsing him. Tell him to call me. And we laughed, and Cedric said, better than that, we're coming to Atlanta in a couple of weeks. I'm going to have him ask you face-to-face. And sure enough, Cedric Richmond, and at that time, Simone Sanders, TV personality, was working with his campaign. They took me in the back, and he said, okay, I need you. I want you to work with my campaign. And I said, all right, well, great. What do you need me to do? Biden said, you know, we have the primaries coming up, and if I could get about a dozen of your members to endorse me, I'll be in good shape. It'll show that I have some good momentum. I called up a good friend of ours, Calvin Smyrie, who was also one of the longest serving legislator in Georgia's history.
Dubbed the dean.
The dean.
And now I am dubbing you the new dean. All right?
We called him up, and in 2 weeks, we had 400 some odd black legislators nationwide that endorsed Biden, and he has been very grateful ever since. The dean, he nominated the dean to be the ambassador
to the Bahamas.
To the
right.
Bahamas. They've offered a number of jobs. I didn't want to leave the legislature or leave my job or leave my kids and all that other stuff. So this was a position that does not to require me to leave the legislature or leave the state or move my family and the like. So I'm very grateful.
And that's what I call real servitude.
Mm-hmm.
Before we wrap this up, and we would need some guidance from you on this, we've noticed that in the city of Atlanta, there are senior citizens. One happens to be a former teacher I know in her 90s, who are challenged with paying their property taxes. Therefore, these old houses are sitting on land. And we know that we have folk who want to develop that land. And many of them don't live here. And very little attention paid to the infrastructure. All these big high-rise places going up condos. Look, y'all, I'm from Atlanta. I'm from Georgia. And I know he's from New Jersey. But I would like to be able to see. I don't want to drive down the street and everything is blocked, but I don't have any control over that. But the problem is that we don't have expansion with highways, roads, parks, etc. I mean, that traffic is jammed. And it's killing us. It's choking us. It's been choking us here. And I'm just going to say some things that Mayor Jackson was saying before he died. I heard him over at the YMCA. We need rail. Flat out need rail. We don't need, I'm not trying to come against no asphalt or cement folk. We need all of these roads fixed in Atlanta, city of Atlanta, government, and state, federal, you know how the money works. We need them fixed, but we need more roads, more highways before we have any more buildings. I don't care about the tax structure. I don't care who's contributing to whose campaign. Citizens, I want you to hear this. We're going to have to get on our folk who are commissioning this. Okay? I used to work in buildings up in City Hall. But that's back to what we can do right now. I think low-hanging fruit. We have retired people who can barely pay their taxes. Many folk who retired, let's say if you were a teacher, like one of my girlfriends from Douglas High School, now in her 90s, and when she retired, her salary with a master's degree was something like $70,000. Oh, that was a lot of money, supposedly. She only retired with 60%. So that's TRS. You work 30 years, you get 60%. Do the math, and that's taxed. Now her house is beginning to crumble on her. So I understand that our mayor, Andre Dickens, has been visiting some of our people here in the city of Atlanta, helping them with their recipients of their taxes being paid. We need to grandfather those taxes in and put a ceiling on it.
Right.
We need to do that. And I think we owe some of the credit for those funds to Tyler Perry.
Tyler Perry, yeah, absolutely.
And we're so grateful for that. Tyler Perry has done so much in the community.
Absolutely.
A lot of folk don't know how to give back.
Right.
But thank you, Jesus, he knows how to give back. And so, y'all, I can preach about that 10% stuff. Okay? Some people can't give 10%. Others can get more than 10%. So preachers, don't give folk a break. Who can give more than 10%. And don't be getting on folk who can't pay 10%. Let's go back and look at the scripture. I don't want to get into theology. But
the Verdaillia Turners of the world can give more than 10%. You had raised such a great point.
We need, and even in DeKalb County, some leadership on that. For our citizens on that certain income bracket, those taxes are a ceiling put on them. And even when they die, whoever is bequeathed to, their, we can relook at it. In other words, we don't want folk coming in grabbing these folk property. No more.
You got some good news for you. Actually, maybe about 12 years ago, a brilliant legislator from DeKalb sponsored a bill which puts a property freeze on property taxes. For anyone, you buy your home, you can elect to have a freeze on your taxes. And what that does is that whatever your house is assessed at that time, it cannot be increased. Now, when you sell your home, the new purchaser has to pay the new reassessed value, but they can get it frozen at that rate. Now, unfortunately, this just covers the property tax. It does not cover the school board tax, which is the most substantial portion.
2/3 of it right now.
However, we're also, just this year, we put in place for seniors under a certain income bracket that they can be exempted for even more property taxes. And there is much conversation being had as we speak to do something about the ever rising taxes that we pay for school board taxes. We definitely need to do something because we hear from all the time from constituents that some of our seniors are now paying more in taxes than they paid when they had a mortgage.
Like some of those condos.
Absolutely. And Georgia is a favorite among people to move to. As a matter of fact, the U.S. Census that was last completed in 2020, from 2010 to 2020, 1 million new people moved to Georgia. And it's just an incredible stat, and it's escalating all the time. And some will say one of the benefits of this pandemic is that we have more and more people who are working from home. If it were not for that, we would not be able to navigate the streets, particularly
Certainly be choked in Atlanta,
absolutely. It is terrible now. Could you imagine if everybody had to drive into work? It would even be crazy. Now, as for your transportation issue, I will tell you, way back just before Jimmy Carter took office as president, former governor of Georgia, state senator of Georgia, they had a proposal for MARTA. MARTA is our mass transit system. I used to be on the MARTA Oversight Committee, and I saw the original plans for MARTA, mass transit, in the metro area, and it was just extraordinary. It included subways. It included trains going everywhere. But we had a lot of communities, a lot of counties, when it came time to vote, they voted it down. Very few communities.
Like they voted, like they didn't want 400 there. I remember that. And all of them had to
their
fight
reasons,
for 400.
Yeah, the reasons were, we feel if we have mass transit in our county, people are going to come on the trains, I guess, and steal our TVs, get back on the trains and go back where they are. Just foolish kind of thinking. If you take some of the metropolitan areas around this nation that have just extraordinary mass transit systems, for instance, D.C. or New York. In New York, for instance, the New York public transportation system goes through some of the most wealthiest communities in the state to some of the poorest communities in the state. Everybody rides the train. They have no problems getting around. As a matter of fact, you don't even need a car in New York because mass transit goes everywhere. That's certainly not the case in Georgia. Joe Biden used to live in Delaware when he was a U.S. Senator, which was like a 35-minute train ride from Delaware to the Capitol, and he would go home every day on mass transit. And that's the kind of system that we need here in Georgia, where we have a mass transit system that can go everywhere.
Yes, and across the country. And next time, y'all, we'll do a little history as to why we don't have that across the country, where the automobile industry did with the highways. But it's another topic. So we want to thank you. Anything else you want to say to us?
Well, it's good to be here, and I just applaud you for keeping our citizens informed and engaged. That's so very important to the process. I'd love to see more of our community get involved, and they would ensure that they would have a better representation. Good to be here.
And good to have you, and we're so honored. This is
Thank you.
State Representative Billy Mitchell, a true public servant. And everybody pass this on, like us. Look, y'all, this is a labor of love. Share it. So long.